The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. A wrong number. A stranger's voice, cracked with terror, swallowed by static and the roar of collapsing earth. Most people would have hung up. Nathan Cross almost did. But the sound of a woman screaming beneath the groan of a dying house stopped his thumb over the screen. A retired Navy SEAL who'd spent years running from the one mission he couldn't finish, and one desperate call was about to drag him back into the fire. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a broken man decides to stop running, stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if it moves you, hit like before we begin. But the rain had been falling since early afternoon, the kind that didn't announce itself with drama, but simply arrived and refused to leave. A low gray curtain pulled across the Santa Clarita Hills that turned every road into a shallow river and every hillside into something uncertain. By 10 o'clock, it had stopped being weather and started being a warning. Most people in the valley had locked their doors, turned up their televisions, and chosen not to think about what water does to hillsides when it has nowhere left to go. Nathan Cross was awake. He'd been awake since 9, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold and a circuit diagram he wasn't really reading. The house was quiet, except for the rain hammering the roof and the occasional low moan of wind pushing through the old sliding door seal he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. Lily was asleep down the hall. He could hear her through the wall, not sound exactly, but the specific quality of silence that only comes from a room where someone small is breathing steadily. He'd learned to hear that. In the years since it had become just the two of them, that particular silence had become its own kind of anchor. He was 43 days into a dry stretch from the bourbon, which wasn't a record but felt like one. On the table beside the circuit diagram was his phone, screen down, and a water glass he kept refilling like it was doing something meaningful. The job site tomorrow was a commercial retrofit on a medical office in Burbank. 3,000 square feet of outdated wiring that needed to come out before anything new could go in. He'd been subcontracting for 8 months. The work was steady, honest, and quiet, which suited him exactly. He was not a man who talked about what he used to be. There were people in his life. The foreman on the Burbank job, the neighbor 2 doors down named Eddie, who kept inviting him to watch football, who thought he was a veteran generally, without particulars. That he'd been in the Navy, that he'd come out quiet. They read the discipline in how he moved and the distance in how he listened, and they filled in the rest with whatever made sense to them. He didn't correct them, and he didn't explain. There was nothing to explain that wouldn't take longer than he wanted to spend and end in a place he didn't want to go. The phone buzzed on the table at 11:47. He turned it over. Unknown number, area code he didn't recognize. He let it ring once, twice. Probably a misdial. Probably someone punching numbers on a wet phone, frustrated, trying to reach someone who was not Nathan Cross. He hit decline and set it back down. It rang again 11 seconds later, same number. He stared at it for 3 full rings. Then something, not instinct exactly, more like the failure of an instinct to fire correctly, made him pick up. Yeah. The sound that came through was not a voice at first. It was wind, or what he thought was wind, and underneath it a structural sound, something low and rhythmic, like a building settling hard and fast. Then a woman. Her voice came in pieces, shredded by static and by whatever was happening around her. Wrong number. I know it's a wrong number. Please don't hang up. He didn't hang up. He sat forward in his chair. Who is this? My name is Claire. The house is... I don't know how to... A sound like something tearing. Fabric or wood, he couldn't tell. I called 911. They said 40 minutes. There's a slide. The back wall is already... Hey. He said it like he meant it. Not loud, but firm enough to cut through. Slow down. Claire. Are you inside a building right now? Yes. My house. I'm on Ridgecrest Canyon Road. The hillside behind me is moving. I can hear it. The back of the house already... She stopped. A sound came through the line that made Nathan stand up from the table. He knew that sound. He had heard it once in a place he did not think about, and it was the sound of load-bearing material giving way. Are you hurt? Not yet. I'm in the main hallway. But the back rooms, the kitchen wall cracked 20 minutes ago, and now there's a gap. There's an actual gap in the floor. Don't go toward the back of the house. He was already moving toward the coat rack by the front door. Jacket, boots, keys. He located each by feel, muscle memory, moving his hands before his mind fully decided anything. Where's the gap in relation to the stairs? She hesitated, and he could hear her moving, hear the creak of something underneath her. How do you know to ask that? Which side of the stairs, Claire, left or right? Left, toward the back of the kitchen side. Stay on the right side of the stairs, stay off the left wall. Can you get to a door frame on the right side? Yes, there's the entryway arch. I'm near that now. Good. Get under it. Put your back against the right side of that arch and keep your weight centered. He had his jacket on. He was pulling up the GPS on his phone, the address she'd given him punching into his mind with the clarity that came from a specific kind of training. Ridgecrest Canyon Road. He knew where that was. It was 22 minutes in dry weather. Tonight it would be more. Maybe much more. The 911 operator said 40 minutes, Claire said. Her voice had settled, not calm, but controlled, the way people get when they find one thing to hold on to. She was holding on to his voice. He understood that. I know they did. I'm looking at the road now. He was in the truck, key in the ignition. The rain hit the windshield in sheets. I'm about 20 minutes from Ridgecrest if the roads aren't washed out. I'm going to keep this call open. Can you hear anything from above you? From the roof? A pause. She was listening. No, not above. The sounds are all from the back. And below, there's something happening with the foundation on the left rear. I can hear it. What does it sound like? Like something grinding, slow, and then it stops, and then it starts again. He backed the truck out of the driveway and turned onto his street, wipers at full, headlights cutting a pale tunnel in the rain. The grinding she was describing was not a good sound. It was the sound of a structure's footing losing its argument with what was beneath it. Okay, listen to me. That sound means the foundation is shifting. It doesn't mean the house is coming down in the next 5 minutes. You have time if you stay in position. Don't move unless the sounds get louder or faster. If they do, I need you to move toward the front door immediately. Can you see the front door from where you are? Yes. Good. The first stretch of road was wet but clear. He hit 45 on a road where 30 was already pushing it, felt the rear tires float once on a patch of standing water, and corrected without thinking about it, without anything in his body responding the way fear responds. He had spent years in environments where the body's fear response was a liability. He had trained it like a muscle until it went quiet under pressure and only came back later, much later, in the dark and the still hours when there was nothing else to occupy the space it needed. You said you called 911 first, he said, keeping her talking because talking meant breathing and breathing meant she wasn't in shock. Yes, I was outside checking the drainage on the back terrace. There was water coming over the retaining wall, and I wanted to see, and then the ground just moved. The terrace dropped. I barely got back inside. A short, compressed sound that might have been a laugh. I'm not supposed to be home tonight. I had a meeting in the city. It ran long, and I decided to just come home. What kind of meeting? What? The meeting? What kind? Board meeting. I run a company. Why are you asking me about my meeting? Because I need you talking and not listening to the house. Keep going. Board meeting about what? There was a brief silence in which he could hear her recalibrating, deciding to trust this. Expansion strategy. We're looking at opening 3 new regional offices, and the board is nervous about the capital outlay. A pause. Another grinding sound came through the phone, distant, deep. Her voice tightened. That sound is louder. How much louder? More. More continuous. It was stopping before, now it's not really stopping. He pressed the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on a curve and he steered through it, one hand steady. Nathan. She said his name, which meant she'd been listening earlier when he hadn't realized he'd given it. How far are you? He looked at the GPS. The route had rerouted once already, a road-blocked symbol on Ridgecrest lower. He was being sent up the long way, adding time he didn't have. 15 minutes. I don't think I have 15 minutes. Tell me what you're hearing right now. The grinding. And a new sound, higher, like like something metal stressed, and the floor under me just... She stopped. He heard it through the phone before she described it, a deep, resonant crack. The kind of sound that takes a moment to understand because the brain keeps trying to find a more acceptable explanation for it. The floor moved. Under my feet, it moved. Get to the front door. Now. Don't run. Walk fast, but don't run. If you run and the floor shifts, you go down. Okay. He could hear her footsteps, quick and deliberate. Something fell in the background. Glass, the splintering cascade of it. I'm moving. I can see the door. Get it open. Get the door open and step into the door frame. Don't go outside yet. Why not outside? Because if the structure shifts while you're crossing the threshold, you want something over you. The sound from her end changed then. He heard her hand on the door handle, heard the click of it, heard the immediate surge of wind and rain as it swung open, and then heard something else entirely. A sound he recognized from a place in his memory he kept under lock and key. The beginning sound of total structural failure. Not the grinding, not the cracking, but something below and before all of that. A sound like the earth itself clearing its throat. Nathan, I'm here. It's the back of the house. I can see the back hallway. The floor back there. It's gone. It's just, there's nothing. Her voice broke on that word. Not with crying. With the specific register that comes from seeing something you do not have a category for. A floor that has become a hole, a wall that has become open air. Look at me. He said it like she could. He meant orient to my voice. Don't look at the back. You're at the front door. What's in front of you? What do you see? Rain, the driveway, my car. Good. Those things are real. What's under your feet right now? Tile. The entryway tile. It's solid. Feel how solid it is. That is the ground. You're standing on something real. He took a hard left at a junction, headlights sweeping over a hillside that was visibly different than it should have been. A whole section of the upper slope had come loose and was sitting in the middle of the road in a dark mass of mud and rock. He stopped the truck, got out in the rain, assessed it in 3 seconds. Too wide to go around on the right. On the left there was maybe a truck's width of road still exposed. He got back in, killed the headlights so he could see the road edge more clearly in the rain, and went left. 2 wheels on gravel and 2 on nothing he could see. Are you still there? Claire's voice, thin but steady. Still here. He brought the truck back to both lanes past the slide, hit the lights again. Ahead, the road climbed. He could see on the GPS that he was less than 2 miles from Ridgecrest. I need you to do one more thing. What? I need you to tell me what the house looks like from the doorway. Right now. Don't move. Just look and tell me. She was quiet for a moment. He heard her breathing change as she looked. The left side of the roof is lower than the right side, she said slowly. Like it's been pushed down. And the living room wall on the left has a crack in it, a big one. It goes from the ceiling all the way to the floor, and there's light coming through it. No, not light. Just air. Outside air, I can feel it from here. He processed this. Left side compromised. Foundation failure on the left rear. The structure was rotating on its left axis, pivoting slowly like a boat taking on water on one side. It would hold for a while, and then it would not hold at all. You need to stay in that door frame, Claire. Exactly where you are. I am 1 minute away. 1 minute. 30 seconds. He came around the last curve on Ridgecrest Canyon Road and saw it, a house at the edge of a hillside that was no longer fully where it was supposed to be. The lights were still on inside, which was the most disorienting thing, all that warm light pouring from windows that were visibly tilted. The whole left side of the structure canted downward like a photograph hung wrong. The hillside behind it, a mass of black moving earth. The driveway was flooded to his ankles when he stepped out. He could hear the slide from 50 feet away. Not a roar, but a constant low hiss, the sound of 10,000 tons of earth making a slow, inevitable decision. He could see her in the doorway. She was holding onto the doorframe with both hands, rain soaking her. She was still in what looked like work clothes, dark blazer, hair plastered to her face, and she was looking at him with an expression he had seen before. In other places, on other faces, the expression of someone who has been alone in a terrifying situation and suddenly is not. The relief in it was almost physical, like watching someone surface from deep water. He crossed the driveway at a run. "Nathan Cross," he said, stopping in front of her. He said it because in his experience, the first exchange of real names between people in a crisis mattered. It was the difference between stranger and person. She stared at him. She was white-knuckling the doorframe in her leg. Her right leg was trembling, whether from cold or from strain he couldn't tell yet. You're an electrician," she said. Not an accusation, just the only information she had about him, surfacing in the wrong moment. "I'm whatever the situation needs," he said. "Can you walk?" "Yes. I think, yes." "Then we're leaving right now. Stay on my left. Don't let go of my arm. When we get to the driveway, move fast, but keep your feet under you." He put his hand out. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she took it, both hands wrapping around his forearm, and they stepped out of the door frame together into the rain. They were 12 feet from the front door when Nathan heard it. Not the grinding, not the cracking, the other sound, the one he had heard on the phone, the throat-clearing sound, the sound that precedes the thing that comes after it, with no time in between. He grabbed Claire around the waist and moved. Not a run, a controlled drive forward, his body angled over hers, his eyes already on the truck, his feet finding purchase on the wet concrete by something that was not entirely conscious anymore. She made a sound against his shoulder. Surprise, not fear. She was too focused to be afraid in that exact second. And then the house behind them gave a sound that he would describe later, if he ever described it, as a sentence that ends before the period. A beginning that simply stops. He didn't look back until they were at the truck. The left side of the house had dropped. Not completely. Not yet. But the left rear corner had given up its argument with the earth and had sunk 2 full feet, taking the roofline with it. And the crack Claire had described in the living room wall was now open enough to see through clearly from 50 feet away in the dark. The lights inside were still on. That was still the most surreal thing. All that warm, domestic light spilling out of a house that was taking its last breaths. He got her into the passenger seat. She was shaking. He was not. That would come later. That always came later. But he noticed his hands were not entirely dry and could not decide how much of that was rain. He got in the driver's side, started the truck, and began to back down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the lights inside the house flickered once, then again. Then they went out. "Don't look," he said. She was already looking. He let her. He understood the need to watch a thing end so that you could confirm it had ended. He drove carefully down the flooded driveway, back toward the road, back toward the grid of lights in the valley below where things were wet but stable and standing, and where Lily was asleep against a wall that was not moving. Claire was quiet until they reached the road. Then she said, very quietly, "You drove out here for a wrong number." He was watching the road. There was another slide debris field ahead, smaller than the last one, passable on the right. "Yeah," he said. "Why?" He thought about that for a moment. Not the answer. He'd known the answer before he'd known the question, but how to give it to her without it sounding like something it wasn't. A performance, a statement, something rehearsed. "You sounded like someone who needed help," he said finally. "That's usually enough." She looked at him for a long time in the dark of the truck cab. He kept his eyes on the road. The rain was still coming down, steady and certain, and somewhere behind them in the dark a hillside was still moving, still claiming what it had decided to claim. But the road ahead was lit. The truck was solid beneath them. And at the bottom of the hill, the valley waited, imperfect and rain-soaked and ordinary, which on a night like this felt very close to miraculous. They were 3 miles down the mountain when Claire stopped shaking. Not because she'd calmed down. Nathan could see from the way she was holding her right arm against her body that something was wrong there, something she hadn't mentioned yet, but because the shaking had reached some kind of limit and her body had simply run out of the energy to sustain it. She was leaning against the passenger door with her head back and her eyes open, watching the rain on the windshield with the particular blankness of someone whose mind is still back at the house, still standing in that doorframe, still watching the floor of her kitchen become a hole. He didn't push conversation. He drove and let her have the silence. His phone was in the cup holder. He picked it up at a stop where a debris field narrowed the road to one lane and dialed with his thumb while he waited for a gap. His neighbor Carol, 56, retired schoolteacher, the kind of person who answered her phone at midnight without making it a thing, picked up on the second ring. "Nathan? Hey, sorry about the hour. Are you up?" "I'm up. The rain's been keeping me up. What do you need?" "I need someone at my house. Lily's asleep. She doesn't know I left. I just need someone there until I get back. Shouldn't be more than an hour." A pause. Carol had known him for 4 years. She'd learned not to ask too many questions about the times he seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of what people did and when and why. "Give me 2 minutes," she said, and hung up. He set the phone down. The road opened up and he pulled through. "You have a daughter," Claire said. It wasn't a question. She'd heard it. 12. She's asleep. "And you left her to come up here." She said this flatly, without judgment or gratitude in it yet. Just processing, trying to understand the math of what had happened. "She's not alone now." Claire turned her head and looked at him. In the dark of the cab, her face was hard to read, pale with streaked mascara and a cut near her hairline he hadn't noticed before. Small, barely bleeding, but real. She'd hit something on the way out or on the way in. She hadn't mentioned it. "Your arm," he said. "How long has it been hurting?" She looked down at it. Something moved across her face. The particular expression of a person who has been functioning on adrenaline and has just now, at the mention of a specific thing, felt it. It started when I was on the terrace. When the ground shifted, I fell against the railing." "Which part of the arm?" "The forearm and the shoulder. Mostly the shoulder." "Is it sharp pain or dull?" "Sharp when I move it. Dull when I don't." "Probably not broken. Could be a separated shoulder or a bad sprain. Either way, you need imaging." He glanced at the GPS. "Valley Presbyterian is 20 minutes from here. I can take you there directly." "I don't need—" She stopped herself, reconsidered. "Okay." He appreciated that. The willingness to stop in the middle of an automatic refusal and actually think about whether it was right. A lot of people couldn't do that. He'd known people, teammates, officers, who would die before they'd revise a position they'd stated out loud. They drove for a while without talking. The rain was beginning to ease slightly, not stopping, but pulling back to something more reasonable. The truly violent part of the night perhaps moving east. Nathan kept the speed steady. His hands were easy on the wheel. "How did you know?" Claire asked. "Know what?" "The thing about the door frame, the left side of the stairs. You knew exactly what to ask and in what order." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been in collapsing structures before. As an electrician." "No." She waited. He could feel her waiting, the particular quality of it. She wasn't the kind of person who filled silence with noise. She sat in it and let it work. "I was in the Navy," he said. "Before. For a long time." "What did you do in the Navy?" "Different things at different times." Another silence. She accepted the non-answer without pushing on it, and he noted that too, filed it somewhere. The hospital's emergency entrance was lit up orange-white in the rain when they pulled in, and a nurse at the intake desk looked up with the practiced readiness of someone who'd seen the weather and was expecting exactly this kind of arrival. Nathan had Claire's good arm over his shoulder before she'd fully gotten out of the truck. She was moving stiffly now, the adrenaline well and truly gone, every injury making its case simultaneously. She didn't lean on him more than she needed to. He noticed that too. They took her back within 10 minutes. He gave the intake nurse Claire's name and said he'd be in the waiting room, and Claire, who was being wheeled away on a gurney, turned her head and looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully name. Not helplessness. She wasn't that. Something more like surprise at herself, at the fact that she was being wheeled away by a stranger in a hospital at midnight, and some part of her was okay with it. He sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room with a vending machine coffee he didn't taste and his phone in his hand. He texted Carol. "Going to be a little longer. She okay?" Carol's reply came back in under a minute. "Lily's fine. Still sleeping. Don't rush." He set the phone down and sat back and let himself be still for the first time since 11:47. The hospital waiting room had that specific nighttime energy. Not busy, not empty. The overhead lights slightly too bright for the hour. A man across the room with a towel wrapped around his hand. A woman in the far corner feeding an infant with the focused exhaustion of someone in the 5th month of not sleeping. Real life. Continuing its regular business, regardless of the fact that a house had just slid into a canyon 12 miles up the road. He was still there when his mind went somewhere he hadn't invited it. It did that sometimes. In the quiet, in the stillness, especially in the specific aftermath of an operation, and that was what his mind had filed this as, correctly or not, an operation, it would go there without asking. To a hillside that was nothing like this one. To a structure that had failed differently, more deliberately, failing because someone had made it fail. To a voice on a radio that had said his name with a specific cadence, the 2 syllables of it, and then had not said anything after that. Marcus Webb. 10 years ago, in a place that didn't officially exist on any map that any of the men involved had ever been authorized to discuss. His best friend in this only way men like them were allowed to have best friends. Through proximity, through shared misery, through the particular dark humor that becomes the lingua franca of people who operate in places where dark humor is the only language that doesn't get you killed. Marcus had gone back into a building Nathan had told him not to go back into. He'd gone back because there was a kid, a boy, maybe 9 or 10, trapped in a back room that their initial sweep had missed. Marcus had heard him. Nathan hadn't, or hadn't processed it fast enough. And he'd gone back in without a word, the way he did everything, direct and without announcement, and the building had come down 11 seconds later. 11 seconds. Nathan had counted them afterward, standing outside in the dust and the ringing silence, and he had never in 10 years stopped wondering what he might have done differently in those 11 seconds if his mind had been a half-second faster, if he'd heard what Marcus heard when Marcus heard it. He came back to the waiting room, to the vending machine coffee, to the woman with the infant across the room who had started humming something quiet and tuneless. He realized his hand on the armrest was closed into a fist, and he opened it deliberately and pressed his palm flat against his thigh. The doctor came out 40 minutes later, young, with the particular brisk efficiency of someone who had been awake since 6 a.m. and was working through it on process rather than energy. "You came in with Ms. Whitmore?" "Yeah." "Shoulder is dislocated, not separated. We've reduced it. That means put it back." "I know what it means." A slight recalibration in the doctor's expression. "She also has 2 cracked ribs on the right side, consistent with impact trauma. And some lacerations. The one on her forehead needed 4 stitches. She's going to be sore for a while. We'd like to keep her for observation for a few hours, given the reported exposure and the nature of the incident." He paused. "She asked me to tell you she's fine and that you can go." Nathan considered this. "But she didn't ask you to give me her room number." A small pause. "She did not instruct me either way on that point." "What room?" "She was in a curtained bay near the back of the emergency ward, propped up against pillows with her right arm in a sling and a small bandage above her left eyebrow and an IV in her left hand that was probably fluids. She looked, in the flat, honest light of the hospital, like a person who had been through something. Not fragile, not that, but real in a way that the brief impression of her on a doorstep in the rain had not quite communicated. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, and the set of her mouth was the set of someone who'd been running on compression for a very long time. She was maybe 30. She looked like she'd been 30 for a while. She saw him come through the curtain and something crossed her face. Irritation and relief in quick succession, neither one winning cleanly. "I told them you could go," she said. "I heard." He pulled a chair over and sat. "I wanted to make sure you were actually okay before I did. I have a dislocated shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, and 4 stitches. That's the version of okay available to me tonight. That's a functional okay. I'll take it." He leaned back in the chair. "Your company, the board meeting tonight. Do you have someone you should be calling?" She looked at the ceiling. "My assistant, my COO, and my general counsel because the house was insured through the company's real estate portfolio. And that's going to become a very complicated conversation." A pause. "My phone is somewhere in that canyon. You can use mine." "In a minute." She looked at him directly then, the way she hadn't quite been doing since the truck. The hospital lights didn't allow for the soft evasions that darkness does. "The Navy, the different things at different times. You were special operations." He didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. She was reading something in the confirmation of silence. "I've worked with defense contractors," she said, "for some of our emergency infrastructure projects. I know what a certain kind of training looks like in a person. The way you move, the way you asked questions on the phone, the way you were calm in that. She stopped. Something flickered across her face. She was remembering. He watched her put it away deliberately, a practiced compression. He recognized it. You've been in worse situations than that house. Most situations I've been in were less structural, he said, which was true enough. But you've carried people out of places before. He said nothing. I'm not asking you to tell me things you don't want to tell me, she said. She exhaled. I'm trying to understand what happened tonight, because I make decisions for a living. I assess situations, and I figure out what the most rational course of action is, and I execute it. And the most rational thing that happened tonight was that a stranger heard a wrong number and drove up a mountain in a storm. She looked at him steadily. That doesn't fit any framework I have. People do things that don't fit frameworks, Nathan said, more often than the frameworks account for. Is that your way of saying it was nothing? No, it was something. I'm just saying it wasn't complicated. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the curtain, the ER continued its night. A cart wheeling by, someone calling a name, the low beep of a monitor doing its steady, reliable work. Nathan's coffee from the vending machine was somewhere in the waiting room, still getting cold. My company is called Whitmore Integrated Solutions, she said suddenly, not because it was relevant, but in the way people sometimes offer a piece of themselves because they feel an imbalance they want to correct. We build emergency response infrastructure, communication systems, disaster coordination software, protocol frameworks for municipalities. The board meeting tonight was about a federal contract. She paused. Which is ironic. You build emergency response systems. And my own emergency response tonight was accidentally calling an electrician. Former electrician, he said. Current electrician. It depends on the day. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. The ribs probably made smiling uncomfortable, but something in that direction. It made her look younger. Or maybe just less like someone running a company. She used his phone to call her assistant, a conversation he stepped out for, standing in the corridor with his back against the wall and his arms crossed and his eyes on the middle distance. He was thinking about the drive up, the road through the slide, the specific sound the house had made. He was also thinking about the 11 seconds, which was something he tried not to do in public places. When he came back in, she was done with the call. She handed him the phone. Her eyes were tired now, the sustained operations look he knew well, the look of a system that had been running at emergency capacity for several hours and was beginning to tally the cost. My COO is sending a car, she said, and my assistant is handling the rest of the calls. A pause. You should go home. Your daughter. Carol's with her. Carol. Neighbor. She's fine. Still, she looked at him. Nathan, you should go home. He considered her for a moment. The sling, the stitches, the specific quality of exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from the sustained effort of being afraid and not showing it. He'd seen it on teammates. He'd seen it in the mirror enough to know its shape. When the car comes, he said. I'll go when the car comes. She opened her mouth, closed it. The refusal and the concession happened simultaneously, and the concession won. Fine, she said. He sat back in the chair. She closed her eyes. The monitor beside her bed continued its steady, reliable sound. The most reassuring sound in any hospital, the one that just means still here, still here, still here. He thought about the house, not the collapse itself, but the moments inside it, his hands on the doorframe, the feel of the foundation's wrongness transmitted through the floor into the soles of his boots. He'd known structures in collapse before, and they all had a specific grammar to them, a sequence of events that preceded the final one, a language that you could read if you'd been made to learn it under conditions that left no room for misreading. Tonight he'd read it correctly. There was no drama in that, no particular pride, just the flat acknowledgement that the training had worked the way training is supposed to. But something else was working in him tonight. Something he hadn't expected, which was the absence of the specific paralysis that had descended on him at other moments in the last several years. The hesitation, the check before action, the fragment of 11 seconds that would insert itself at the threshold of every significant decision and ask him, in Marcus's voice without using Marcus's words, "Are you sure?" Are you absolutely sure? Because last time? Tonight the phone had rung, and he had answered without the hesitation, and he had moved without the check. Not because the fear was gone. It was never gone. That was a myth that people who hadn't felt it told themselves. But because something in the clarity of someone else's immediate need had been louder than the hesitation, and he had followed the louder thing. He didn't know yet what to do with that. Claire's COO arrived 45 minutes later, a large, efficient man named Gerald, who wore a raincoat over what was clearly a very recently put-on suit and had the manner of someone absolutely accustomed to midnight emergencies, who shook Nathan's hand with both of his and said, "I understand you got her out," in a voice that made it clear he understood what that meant. "She got herself to the doorframe," Nathan said. "I just drove up." Gerald looked at him for a moment in the way people look at you when they know the accurate version of a story and are deciding whether to argue with you about the version you're telling. He decided not to. He went in to see Claire. Nathan put on his jacket. He stood for a moment outside the curtain. Through it he could hear Claire's voice, low and precise, immediately in operational mode. Something about the insurance documentation, something about a contact in the municipal planning office. The full equipment of her professional self reassembled with a speed that was impressive and probably, he thought, not entirely healthy. He left without going back in. He thought about leaving a note and decided it was unnecessary. She had his number. She'd called it once already, under circumstances considerably worse than these. The drive home was quiet. The rain had finally eased to something close to mist, the worst of the night done, the roads wet and still but passable. He came down out of the hills into the flat grid of the valley, where the streetlights were hazy orange circles in the residual moisture, and the gas stations were the only things open, and he drove through it steadily, hands easy on the wheel, the way he always drove when his mind was somewhere other than the driving. Carol was asleep in his armchair when he came in, her phone in her lap, a documentary about birds running silently on the television. She woke up the way old teachers wake, fully, immediately, without the gradual surfacing most people need. "Everything okay?" she said. "Yeah, thanks, Carol." She looked at him for a moment with the specific look she had, the look that was not quite a question, but was in the neighborhood of one. And then she put on her shoes and picked up her keys and said, "There's water in the kettle if you want it," and left. He stood in his own living room for a moment in the quiet. The rain on the roof was gentle now. The circuit diagram was still on the kitchen table where he'd left it, the cold coffee beside it. Everything exactly as he'd left it, except that 2 hours had happened that had not been in any plan. He walked down the hall. Lily's door was cracked. He pushed it open an inch, 2 inches, until he could see her. The lump of her under the blankets, the dark mass of her hair on the pillow, the entirely ordinary and unremarkable fact of her sleeping. He stood there for longer than was strictly necessary. Then he pulled the door back to its crack and went to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee into the sink and stood at the counter for a moment with his hands on the edge of it and his head down. Not praying, not anything really. Just standing still in the way that people sometimes need to stand still. In their own kitchens, at 1 a.m, after a night that reminded them that their hands still know what they're for. He stood there until the stillness settled, and then he went to bed. He did not dream about the house. He did not dream about Marcus. He did not dream about anything at all, which was unusual enough that he noticed it when he woke up, the blankness of those few hours of sleep, the absence of the grinding of machinery his mind usually kept running through the night. He lay in the gray early morning light. The rain finally stopped, the sky pale and washed and slightly stunned looking, the way skies look after bad weather. And he thought about that for a while. Then Lily's alarm went off down the hall, and the morning began the way mornings do, without waiting for him to finish whatever he was thinking. She called on a Tuesday. Nathan was under a dropped ceiling in the Burbank medical office, pulling old aluminum wiring through a conduit that someone in 1987 had installed with the specific carelessness of a person who assumed it would be someone else's problem eventually. It was now someone else's problem. He had a wire stripper in one hand and a flashlight wedged between his jaw and his shoulder, and his knees were telling him things he didn't want to hear about the concrete floor. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he remembered that the only people who called him during work hours were Lily's school and numbers he didn't recognize, and he'd developed a particular relationship with numbers he didn't recognize. He pulled the phone out. The number wasn't the same one from that night. That phone was in a canyon somewhere, but the name on the screen was one he'd entered himself at the hospital at 2 in the morning, in the Notes app, just in case. Claire W. Hospital gave me her assistant's number. He set down the wire stripper and answered. This is Nathan. It's Claire Whitmore. A pause, brief, the kind that means someone has rehearsed something and then at the last moment decided not to use it. I wanted to call and thank you. I should have done it sooner. It's been 4 days. I figured you were busy. I've been in a hospital bed for 4 days. The ribs complicated some things. She said it in the tone of someone reporting a malfunctioning piece of equipment rather than discussing their own body. But yes, also busy. He sat back against the wall of the half-finished office, knees up, flashlight now pointed at the ceiling for no reason. How are the ribs? Cracked ribs are apparently not something medicine has a particularly elegant solution for. You wait and it hurts. That's the treatment. Yeah, I know. A small pause. Of course you do. Something moved in the air between them, or in the air of the phone call, whatever the equivalent is. The accumulation of things that two people know about each other that aren't quite enough to define what they are to each other. He'd pulled her out of a collapsing house. She'd held onto his arm with both hands in the rain. They had sat in adjacent spaces in a hospital at 1 in the morning while a monitor proved she was still alive. And now they were strangers on a phone call again. I'm glad you called, he said. It was a simple thing to say and he meant it. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to know that you can say no and I won't take it as... She stopped, restarted. I'm not good at this, at asking for things that aren't professional. What do you want to ask? I'd like to meet. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want to see you in a context that isn't a hospital or a mudslide. I want to have a conversation. I feel like I owe you that, at minimum. A real conversation. He thought about it for exactly as long as it took him to decide. When do you get out of the hospital? Thursday. They're releasing me Thursday morning. There's a place called Archer's on Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks. They have good coffee, and the booths are far enough apart that you can actually talk. Friday afternoon, if that works. Another pause, shorter. That works. He went back to the aluminum wiring. His knees continued their complaints. The drop ceiling looked exactly as bad as it had before the phone call, which was very bad, and he worked through it steadily and without particular emotion, which was his general approach to ceilings and to most other things. But something had shifted in the quality of the afternoon. He couldn't have named it exactly. He didn't try. Lily noticed it at dinner, which was pasta with jarred sauce and a salad neither of them was very excited about. She had the specific observational acuity of a 12-year-old who had been watching her father closely for most of her conscious life, calibrating her understanding of him through years of mostly quiet evidence. She knew his moods the way you know the weather in a place where you've lived a long time, not by any single signal, but by the accumulation of small ones. You seem different, she said. Different how? She considered her pasta. Less like you're waiting for something bad to happen. He looked at her. She was looking at her bowl, deliberately, in the way she did when she'd said something true and wanted to give him room to not respond to it if he needed to. I got a call at work today, he said, from a woman I helped last week. Lily looked up then. The storm? You were gone in the middle of the night. He'd told her in the morning, before school, a brief version. There'd been a problem, a person needed help. He'd gone to help. Everything was fine. She'd looked at him with the expression she had for situations that were clearly more than he was telling her, and she'd gone to school without pushing on it, which was both a mercy and an accusation. Yeah, from the storm. She was stuck in a house that was coming down. She called the wrong number and got me. So you went. So I went. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, is she okay? 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. She's okay. And she called to say thank you? She called to say thank you. Lily nodded slowly in the processing way she had. Then she went back to her pasta. A few seconds passed. Dad, she said. Yeah. I think you should go to that. He blinked. Go to what? Wherever she's asking you to go. Lily looked at him steadily with the directness that had been in her since she was about 4, and that he had no idea where it came from, but had always privately admired. She called. That means something. It might just be courtesy. It's not just courtesy, Lily said with the absolute certainty of someone who had made a decision several sentences ago and was only now announcing it. You said she called a wrong number. That means she doesn't know you. She called because she wanted to. He had no good answer to that. He ate his pasta. Is she nice? Lily asked. I don't know yet. I only met her for about an hour and we were mostly focused on not dying. Lily almost smiled at that. Not quite, but the edges of her mouth moved. That's fair. The Friday meeting was unremarkable in the surface way that matters most. 2 people in a booth, coffee on the table, afternoon light coming through the front window of a place that had seen enough of these conversations to not pay attention to this one. Claire was in a loose sweater with her right arm still in the sling, the bandage above her eyebrow reduced now to a small square of medical tape, the bruise around it yellow-green in the way bruises go when they're almost done. She looked like a person recovering. She looked like a person who was recovering faster than anyone had told her to. She was there before him. He'd expected that. He slid into the booth across from her, and the waitress came without being summoned, the way waitresses do in places where the staff has read the table before the table knows it needs reading, and he ordered coffee and Claire said she'd have another one, and then they were alone with the sound of the place around them. You look better, he said. I look terrible, she said, but better than the alternative. Better than the alternative is its own category of good. She looked at him for a moment, then, you do that thing. What thing? Where you say something that sounds simple but isn't. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, her left hand, the unhurt one. I noticed it at the hospital. The things you said were always exactly what was needed and nothing more. It's a specific skill. Or I just don't talk much. No, it's not that. People who don't talk much say nothing and leave space. You say something and it fills the space. She paused. I'm probably making you uncomfortable. I'm fine. You are fine, she said. That's also a specific thing. The way you're fine. She looked out the window for a moment. A bus passed, a couple walking a dog, ordinary Friday afternoon. I grew up watching my father manage people. He was a COO before I ever understood what that meant, and he had this quality. You always felt like he was thinking 1 or 2 moves ahead, but he never let you see him doing it. You have that quality. Your father, Nathan said, is he... He died 4 years ago. Heart attack. He was 61. She said it the way it sounds when someone has said something enough times that the words no longer do the full work of the grief, but the grief is still there in the silence around the words. He would have thought what you did was remarkable. He would have said you were an idiot, but he would have thought it was remarkable. He doesn't sound wrong on either count. She almost laughed at that. It wasn't full, but it was real. The laugh of someone who's been careful for 4 days about breathing wrong and has finally found something worth the risk. She pressed her arm against her side immediately after. Don't do that. Sorry. Don't apologize either. He drank his coffee. She looked at him steadily. There was something in her face that was working something out. The expression of a person who has spent 4 days in a hospital bed with nothing to do but think and has arrived at a set of conclusions and is now deciding how to present them. I looked you up, she said. He set his mug down. I figured. Nathan Andrew Cross, Navy SEAL, 13 years. 2 combat deployments with SEAL Team 3, then a period that the public record goes completely dark on, which I'm told means Tier 1, honorably discharged 8 years ago. She paused. You have a commendation that's classified. The summary record references an incident in which you were listed as the senior surviving member of a 4-man element. The booth was quiet for a moment. Around them, the coffee shop went about its business. I'm not trying to invade your privacy, she said. I needed to understand who you are. I run a company that deals in risk and in people's lives in indirect ways. And you came into my life in a very direct way, and She stopped. I needed to know who you were. And now you know. Now I know the outline. She looked at him directly. I don't know the part that made you stop doing what you were doing and start pulling wire in Burbank. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The flashlight under the dropped ceiling. The aluminum wiring that was someone else's problem in 1987. He thought about how to say it, and then decided to say it the way it was, rather than the way it could be shaped. I lost someone, he said, on my last deployment, a teammate. It was my call that put us in that building, and his call to go back in, and I was standing outside when it came down. He looked at the table. I could give you the operational details and the after-action language, but what it amounts to is that I couldn't make myself go into anything after that. Couldn't make myself be responsible for outcomes in environments I couldn't control. He looked up at her. So I stopped going into environments I couldn't control. Claire didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. People who said they were sorry about Marcus meant well, but it always landed wrong, like a measurement that's close but not right. But you went into my house, she said. Yeah. Why that time? He thought about what he'd thought in the hospital waiting room, about the louder thing. I don't fully know, he said, which was true. I know that when I heard your voice, I didn't go through the calculation I usually go through. I just moved. Maybe, Claire said slowly, that's what it feels like when the calculation finally stops being the loudest thing in the room. He looked at her. She was watching him with an expression that was careful and direct in equal measure. She wasn't performing empathy. She was just thinking out loud and letting him hear it. Maybe, he said. They stayed for another hour. The conversation moved to other things, her company's current projects, the federal contract that the board meeting had been about, a new protocol system for coordinating first responder communication across municipal boundaries and disaster scenarios. He asked questions that were more informed than she expected, and she adjusted accordingly, the way smart people do, not making a show of the adjustment. He told her about the Burbank job, about the aluminum wiring, about the specific problem of commercial buildings from the 1980s whose electrical infrastructure was technically functional, but practically a documentation of every shortcut the decade had normalized. She understood the professional language of decay and remediation in a way that had to do with her work, but also, he thought, with the kind of mind she had. By the time they walked out, it was nearly 5. The light was lower, the Friday afternoon foot traffic picking up. She had a car coming, the same service, probably the same driver as the hospital. He had his truck 2 blocks down. They stood on the sidewalk outside Archer's. Her sling was visible past her jacket, the medical tape above her eyebrow. She'd walked out steadily, he noticed, taking the ribs seriously, not favoring them overtly, a controlled movement. Nathan, she said, not preamble, not build-up, just the name as a landing point before whatever came after it. Yeah, I'm going to offer you something, and I want you to hear it as what it is, which is genuine, and not as something else. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to be rebuilding a lot in the next year, not just the house, which I may not rebuild at all, but the systems we use in our emergency response division. I've been thinking for 2 years about bringing in someone with actual operational field experience to help design and run training programs. Real crisis response, not the simulation-based curriculum we've been using. She paused. I'd like that person to be you. He was quiet. I know you're going to say you're an electrician. I was going to say I'd think about it. She blinked. That had not been what she expected. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but the thing that happens when you've prepared for resistance and the resistance doesn't come. Oh, I have a daughter and a job, and I don't know anything about your company or what this would actually look like in real terms. He looked at her. But I said I'd think about it. That's not nothing. No, she said. That's not nothing. Her car came. He watched her get in, the careful management of the ribs, the door closing. She looked at him through the window, and there was something in the look. Not sentimental, not that. She wasn't built for sentiment as performance, but real. The look of a person seeing another person. He walked to his truck. He drove home through the Friday traffic, which was bad, which was always bad on Fridays in the valley, and he sat in it without impatience, which was not something he'd always been able to do, and he thought about what she'd said at the booth. When the calculation finally stops being the loudest thing in the room, he thought about the 4 days since the storm, about the sleep with no dreams, about the particular quality of the Tuesday afternoon after her call came in, the thing he hadn't been able to name. He thought about Lily saying less like you're waiting for something bad to happen, and the way she'd gone back to her pasta after, giving him the room. He didn't make any decisions in the truck. He drove and he let things exist without deciding them, which was itself a kind of decision, a practice he'd been getting better at for about 6 months. The knowledge that not all things need resolution the moment they arise, that some things are allowed to be just questions for a while. The decision came 3 weeks later, not in a dramatic moment, but in the middle of a Wednesday, under a different dropped ceiling in a different commercial building in Van Nuys, when his phone buzzed with an email from an address he'd added to his contacts outside Archer's on Ventura Boulevard. The email was 4 sentences. It outlined a specific role, a salary figure that made him read it twice, a start date that gave him 6 weeks, and a sentence at the end that said, "No pressure. But I think you know how to do this work." He read it once more. Then he climbed down from the ceiling, found his foreman, and told him he was going to need to find someone for the second half of the Van Nuys job. The foreman looked at him. He was a broad man named Terry who'd worked with Nathan for 8 months and had never asked him anything that constituted a personal question. He looked at Nathan now the way you look at a thing that has shifted slightly without moving and you're trying to figure out if you're seeing it correctly. "Everything okay?" Terry said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "Actually, yeah." He called Lily from the parking lot. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she was probably doing homework. "Hey," she said. "Hey, you remember the woman from the storm?" A pause. The particular pause of someone who remembers something very specifically and is deciding how to play it. "Yes. She offered me a job, different kind of work, teaching people, emergency response and crisis training." Another pause, longer. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah. Are you going to take it?" He looked at the parking lot, at the Van Nuys sky, which was the specific shade of pale blue that Southern California produces in November, washed and clean and absolutely ordinary, at his truck, which needed an oil change and had a crack in the passenger side mirror he'd been meaning to address. "I think I am," he said. Lily was quiet for a moment on the other end. He could hear something in the background, probably her bedroom, probably her desk lamp making the small hum it always made. She'd asked him twice to fix it, and he kept forgetting. "Okay," she said. The word was even and simple, and it held everything she wasn't making a production of. "Okay. I should look into it more first, talk to her about what it actually entails. It's not a decision yet." "Dad." Her voice had the patient quality it got when she felt he was overcorrecting. "It sounds like it's a decision." He thought about the parking lot, about the dropped ceiling, about the email's last sentence. "I think you know how to do this work." And the specific thing it meant, which was not just that she thought he had the skills, which she'd probably known since she'd looked him up, but that she thought he was ready. That something in what had happened between a phone ringing on a rainy Tuesday night and a booth at Archer's on a Friday afternoon had told her that. He thought about Marcus Webb, not in the grinding, recursive way he usually did, not the 11 seconds played and replayed, more like thinking of someone, just thinking of someone, the way you do when they're not there and you're not trying to manage the fact of their absence. Just Marcus. Just the particular reality of him, his voice, his direct and unannounced way of moving, his refusal to calculate when calculation would slow him down. "I think you know how to do this work." "Yeah," Nathan said. "It might be." He could hear the small sound of Lily's lamp in the background, the hum of it, steady and slightly irritating and entirely familiar, and he made a mental note to actually fix it this weekend, and he stood in the Van Nuys parking lot in the November light and felt something that he hadn't felt in long enough that he'd stopped expecting to feel it again. Not happiness exactly, and not relief, and not the absence of pain, because it was still all there. Marcus and the building and the 11 seconds and everything that had come after, all of it still present and still real. But present the way the past is supposed to be present, behind you, not in front of you, no longer standing in the road. "Come home for dinner," Lily said. "I'm coming home for dinner." "I'm making that soup." "The one from the can." "I'm making it better than the can." "You add crackers." "That's not better. That's just crackers and soup." "Crackers improve everything," she said, with absolute finality, and hung up. He stood for another moment, the pale blue sky, the parking lot, the crack in the passenger mirror. Then he got in the truck and drove home. He started on a Monday in December, which meant that his first day at Whitmore Integrated Solutions fell on the same week that Lily had her winter concert at school, a scheduling coincidence she treated as cosmically appropriate in a way he didn't entirely follow,
but didn't argue with.
The offices were in a mid-rise in Culver City, not the glass and steel statement building that the company's federal contracts might have suggested, but a practical, slightly worn building with good natural light and the specific energy of a place where people were actually working rather than performing the idea of work. Claire had said this to him once during one of their follow-up calls before he started, almost in passing, the way she mentioned things that mattered to her. "I don't want a place that looks like what we do. I want a place that does what we do." He'd thought about that for a day or two after. It said something about how she understood the relationship between appearance and function, and it was consistent with everything else he'd observed about her. Gerald, the COO, met him at the elevator on the 4th floor and walked him through the space with the efficient warmth of a man who had onboarded a lot of people and had decided the best version of it was honest and quick. He showed Nathan his office, a real one, with a door, which Nathan hadn't had since the Navy and found slightly alarming, and introduced him to the people he'd be working with most directly. A former FEMA coordinator named Sasha, who had strong opinions about everything and expressed them without apology. A young program developer named Dion, who was 28 and had a master's in emergency management and the specific energy of someone who'd been waiting for a project worth his time. And a retired fire battalion chief named Hal, who'd joined the company 2 years ago and had the compressed, steady quality of a man who had been the calmest person in rooms that needed someone calm. Nathan liked Hal immediately. The reasons were not complicated. Claire's office was at the end of the hall. Gerald brought him there last. She was on a call when they knocked. She held up one finger through the glass without looking up, a gesture so automatic it was clearly pure habit, and finished whatever she was saying in the focused, unhurried way she finished things, which was the way she did most things. Her arm was out of the sling. He could see, from the slight angle she was holding her right shoulder, that it still wasn't fully right. She'd have said she was fine if asked. She ended the call and waved them in. The office was functional without being stark. One wall was entirely windows, the city laid out below in the mid-December gray. Her desk was large and real, actual wood, not composite, with 3 monitors and a physical whiteboard beside it that was currently covered in what looked like a flowchart done in 2 colors of marker. No art on the walls except a framed topographical map of California with certain regions marked in dry erase. No personal photographs he could immediately see. "Nathan Cross?" she said, and stood. She extended her left hand instead of her right with the matter-of-fact practicality of someone who had made this adjustment for weeks and no longer thought about it. He shook it. "Ms. Whitmore." "Claire. Always Claire." She glanced at Gerald. "I've got him from here." Gerald left with the efficiency of a man who had long ago made peace with being dismissed from rooms and found it, on balance, a reasonable arrangement. She gestured to the chairs across from her desk. He sat. She stayed standing for a moment, looking at the whiteboard, then seemed to decide something, and sat down too. "How was the drive?" she asked. "Culver City traffic is a lifestyle choice. I live 7 minutes away. I walk." She looked at him steadily. "I want to ask you something before we get into the actual substance of what you'll be doing here." "Okay. Are you here because you want to be, or because I made it seem like the thing to do?" He held her gaze. "If I were the kind of person who took a job because someone made it seem like the thing to do, I'd still be rewiring buildings in Burbank." She considered that. Then she nodded, once, the nod of a person who asked a question to get a real answer and received one. "Good, because what I'm going to ask you to build is serious work, and I need someone who's in it because it matters to them. Tell me what you're actually asking me to build." She turned to the whiteboard. The flowchart that he'd read as abstract became, as she talked, something specific. A comprehensive crisis response training program that would operate at 3 levels simultaneously. The first was internal. Whitmore's own team, operational staff who deployed in the field during disaster events, and whose training had, by her assessment, been mostly theoretical and insufficient. The second was external. Municipal clients who contracted Whitmore's systems and needed trained personnel to run them effectively in actual emergencies rather than in the controlled conditions under which most training was delivered. The third was something she hadn't fully shaped yet, which she described with the particular kind of precision that means the edges are still unclear, but the center is solid. A public-facing element, accessible to ordinary people, that gave communities actual tools rather than pamphlets. The pamphlet problem, Nathan said. She looked at him. What? Emergency preparedness in this country is mostly pamphlets. Here's what to do in an earthquake. Here's your go-bag checklist. People read them and feel prepared, and they're not prepared because reading about what to do and knowing what to do in your hands and your body are completely different things. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I've been trying to articulate to the board for 8 months. She said it without flattery, just recognition, the sound of someone finding their own thoughts stated clearly by someone else. The board wants metrics, certification numbers, completion rates, things that look like preparedness in a report. What they don't want to fund is the harder thing, which is actually changing how people respond under stress. You can't certify your way out of panic, Nathan said. You train it out. Through repetition, through realistic conditions, through making people fail in safe environments until failure is no longer the thing they're most afraid of. She picked up one of the markers from the whiteboard's tray and turned it in her hand without writing anything. He'd noticed she did this. It handled objects while thinking. Is that how SEAL training works? It's how most effective training works. The military didn't invent it. They just had strong incentives to get it right. And you can build that here. I can build the framework. Dion looks like he can operationalize it, and Hal knows what real field conditions look like. Sasha will tell us when we're wrong. Sasha will tell you when you're wrong, even when you're not entirely wrong. That's her most useful quality and also occasionally her most exhausting one. I've worked with that personality type before. In the Navy? In the Navy, and in every other human environment I've been in. She almost smiled, set the marker down. Okay. She leaned back. There's one more thing, the program. I want it to have a name, not a corporate product name, something real. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what she'd said when she first offered him this. I think you know how to do this work. And about what he'd thought in the parking lot in Van Nuys, about Marcus and the way he'd moved through the world, direct and without announcement. I'll think about it, he said. Take your time. She stood. Let me show you the training space. The work was harder than he'd expected, which was itself expected. He had operated in enough new environments to know that the gap between a role's outline and its reality is always wider than it looks at first. The first 3 weeks were mostly intake, reviewing existing training materials, which ranged from adequate to genuinely inadequate. Sitting in on 3 different training sessions with Whitmore's field staff to see what the actual delivery looked like versus what the curriculum said it should look like. And having long conversations with Sasha, who was, as advertised, exhausting and nearly always right. The scenario simulations are the problem, Sasha told him in the break room on his second week, with the directness of someone who has been waiting to say something to the right person and has now found them. We do tabletops. Everyone sits around a table and talks through what they do. And they perform well in the tabletop because talking about a crisis is nothing like being in one. What happens when you put them in physical simulations? We don't have physical simulations. We have a PowerPoint with sound effects. She said it without sarcasm, which made it land harder than sarcasm would have. I've been requesting a proper training facility for 2 years. Claire's working on it. Sasha looked at him with an expression that was reading something in how he'd said Claire's name, or possibly reading something in how quickly he'd said it. He met the look without comment. She is now, Sasha said. She is now. The facility question was the conversation he had with Claire most often over the first 2 months. Not the only one. They talked daily, sometimes twice, about curriculum structure and client contracts, and the specific problem of training firefighters who thought they already knew everything they needed to know. But the facility conversation was the one that ran under all the others. She wanted to build something. He needed to understand what could actually be built within the capital constraints the board was willing to authorize. He drove with her once to look at a potential space, a former warehouse in El Segundo that a real estate contact of hers was offering at a rate the board might accept. They walked through it together in February, in the flat gray light of an overcast afternoon, their breath visible in the unheated space. It's big enough, he said. But the ceiling height in the back section is wrong for the kind of structural scenarios I want to run. You can't simulate a building collapse or a confined space extraction in a space with 12-foot ceilings. He looked at the floor plan he was holding. You'd need to modify the back section significantly, which adds to the construction cost in a way that might net negative the rate benefit. She was walking the perimeter, her right arm moving more freely now. The shoulder had come back over 6 weeks into something close to full range. She stopped at the back wall and looked up at the ceiling he'd just described. What if we made the collapse simulation lateral rather than vertical? He looked at her. Walk me through that. Instead of a structure that fails downward, you build a structure that fails inward. Wall panels on rails weighted to approximate the resistance of real materials. The trainee has to navigate a space that's actively closing, making decisions under dynamic constraint without the vertical component. He thought about it. It was not a standard approach. It was also not a wrong approach. You'd lose some of the sensory reality. Actual structural collapse has a specific sound profile, a specific weight dynamic, but you'd gain repeatability. You can reset a lateral system in 20 minutes. A vertical drop scenario takes hours to reset between runs. She was still looking at the ceiling. In a facility that's training multiple cohorts a week, repeatability matters more than perfect authenticity. He was quiet for a moment. That's a good point. I have them occasionally. He folded the floor plan. We'd need an engineer who's worked with dynamic set construction, theater industrial crossover. There are people in LA who do that. I know too, she said. I built a stage set for a company event 3 years ago. I hated how it turned out, but I liked the people who built it. They walked back through the space toward the entrance. Their footsteps echoed in the empty building. It was the specific echo of a place that had held something and no longer did, waiting for the next thing. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask me anything. I might not answer. Fair enough. He pushed the door open and held it. The gray outside was a degree or two warmer than the gray inside. How did you end up in this specific field? Emergency response infrastructure. It's not the most obvious career path for a 30-year-old CEO. She walked out past him and stopped in the parking lot, hands in her jacket pockets. She looked at the street for a moment before she answered, the look of someone deciding how far back to start. When I was 19, she said, my mother was in a car accident, bad one. She was on a freeway overpass when a drunk driver clipped her and she went through the barrier. She survived. But the first responders took 47 minutes to reach her because there was a communication failure between 2 dispatch systems in adjacent counties. She paused. 47 minutes. She was conscious for most of it. Another pause. She's fine now. She was fine eventually, but I spent 4 years in college reading everything I could find about emergency communication systems and why they fail and how you'd fix them. And eventually that became the company. He stood with her in the parking lot. February in LA had a specific quality. Not cold exactly, but cool enough to feel real. The sun low and the light coming in at an angle that made everything look slightly more serious than it was. I'm sorry that happened to your mother, he said. I'm not, she said. And then before he could respond to that, I don't mean I'm glad she was hurt. I mean that if it hadn't happened, I don't think I would have found the thing I was supposed to be doing, which is a terrible trade-off to acknowledge. And I acknowledge it anyway because I think the honest version of things is more useful than the comfortable version. He thought about Marcus, about 11 seconds, about the specific terrible trade-off embedded in his own presence in this parking lot, in this job, in the particular shape his life had taken in the aftermath. Yeah, he said, I know that math. She looked at him. He looked at the street. After a moment, she said, should we take the warehouse? Tell the real estate contact you need the back section ceiling raised to 20 feet and see what it does to the number. And if it blows the budget, then we find a different building. She pulled out her phone and made the call right there in the parking lot. He leaned against the car and waited and listened to her negotiate, which was an education in itself. She was precise without being aggressive, gave nothing she hadn't already decided to give, and ended the call with a specific number and a timeline that was 3 weeks shorter than the contact had initially proposed. 22 feet, she said, putting her phone away. They'll take it out of the lease rate. That's better than 20. I tend to overshoot on modifications. It's a flaw. It's not a flaw. My board thinks it's a flaw. Your board is managing risk in a spreadsheet. You're managing what actually works in the field. He opened the passenger door. Those are different jobs. She stood at the car door for a moment, looking at him with the expression she had sometimes. The reading expression, the one that was doing something behind her eyes that she didn't narrate. Then she got in. The name came to him in March, on a Thursday evening at his kitchen table. Lily was doing homework across from him, her textbook spread in the particular organized chaos that was hers alone, and he was reviewing a curriculum draft that Dion had sent over, and the lamp on Lily's side of the table was humming. He had fixed it twice, and it had returned to humming both times, which was its own small defiance, and tonight for some reason he was not irritated by it, but just aware of it, the steady low sound of it, and he thought, this lamp has been making this sound this whole time, and it still does the thing it's supposed to do. He looked at the curriculum draft, at the header at the top where it said, Program Name TBD. He thought about Marcus Webb, about what Marcus did. Not the dying, not the building, but the before, the going back. The hearing something that needed a response, and not calculating his way to stillness, but simply answering. He wrote in the margin of the draft, Answer, the Answer Initiative. Lily looked up from her homework. She had the peripheral awareness of a person who'd grown up reading A Quiet Man and could detect a shift in his stillness, even across a table. You figured something out, she said. Maybe. She looked at what he'd written. He turned the page toward her slightly. She read it and was quiet for a moment. Who's it for? She said. The name. A friend of mine. She looked at him. She was 12, but she was 12 the way some 12-year-olds are, with more than 12 years of attention in her eyes. From the Navy? Yeah. She looked at the name again. I like it, she said. It sounds like something he would have done. He didn't ask how she knew that. She had learned things about Marcus over the years in the accumulated evidence of her father's silences, and she had been making her own quiet map of it without ever claiming to understand more than she did. Yeah, Nathan said. It does. He texted Claire at 9:30. Just the 2 words and a short explanation. The Answer Initiative. Named for someone who answered every call he could. Let me tell you about it when you have time. Her response came back in 4 minutes, which was fast for her at that hour. She was usually in operational mode until 10 or later, running through the next day's priorities. I want to hear it, tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock if you can. I can, he texted back. He put his phone down and looked at the draft in front of him. The name in the margin. The humming lamp. Lily had gone back to her homework, her pencil moving in the focused quiet she brought to things she took seriously. He watched her for a moment. The bent head, the particular angle of her concentration. The fact of her being 12 and present and fine in a world that had also contained all the other things it contained. He thought about the warehouse in El Segundo with the ceiling going to 22 feet. About Sasha's lateral simulation idea. About Dion's curriculum draft, which was better than it should have been for a first pass. About Hal, who had said very little in their meetings, but whose silences had the quality of someone taking precise measurements. He thought about Claire in the parking lot in February. I tend to overshoot on modifications. The way she'd made the call right there, no hesitation, modifying the number upward because she'd decided what was actually needed rather than what was originally asked for. He thought about the specific motion of the night the phone rang. The way his thumb had moved to decline and then had not. The way he'd gotten in the truck with his jacket half on and driven up a mountain because the only voice in the room that mattered was the one that said, this person needs help and you can help them. He had spent a long time, years, honestly, more years than he could fully account for, believing that the silence after Marcus was something he deserved, not as punishment exactly, more as the natural consequence of a specific failure. The silence had felt appropriate, proportionate. He had downsized his life to match it, and the downsizing had felt like honesty. What he was beginning to understand now, not dramatically, not in a single moment of clarity, but the way understanding actually arrives in real life, which is incrementally and without announcement, was that the silence had never been appropriate. It had just been familiar. And familiar things have a way of feeling like truth when you sit with them long enough. The lamp hummed. Lily turned a page. The kitchen held them both in its ordinary way, the way kitchens do, indifferent to the size of what's being thought inside them. He picked up his pen and went back to the curriculum draft. In the margin, beside the name, he wrote one more word, Marcus. Not for the document, just for himself. Just to put it there in ink, in his own handwriting, on a page about work that was partly because of Marcus and would partly always be because of Marcus. A man who heard things other people missed and went toward them without calculation and did not look back. Nathan Cross was learning to do the same thing again. He was not all the way there. He suspected he never would be all the way there, in the clean and completed way that all the way there implies. But he was facing the right direction, which he had not always been, and the distance between where he was standing and where he was going felt, for the first time in a long time, like something other than a sentence. It felt like a road. The Answer Initiative Training Center opened on a Thursday in October, 11 months after Nathan Cross had pulled a wrong number from his breast pocket in a Burbank drop ceiling and decided to answer it. It was not a grand opening in the way events get called grand. There was no ribbon. Claire had suggested one, briefly, and Nathan had looked at her with the expression that had become, over 11 months of working in adjacent offices, a form of communication as clear as language, and she had withdrawn the suggestion without further discussion. What there was instead was a morning walkthrough for the staff and the first cohort of municipal trainees, 42 first responders from 3 counties, in 2 groups, starting their initial orientation in a facility that still smelled faintly of fresh concrete and new rubber matting. Lily came. It was a school day, and Nathan had written the note himself, which he'd never done before, always deferred to the school's absence policy, always found a way to work around it. This time he wrote the note and signed it and told Lily the night before that she was coming whether she wanted to or not. She had looked at him over dinner with the look that meant she'd already planned on coming and was satisfied he'd arrived at it himself. She stood in the main training floor that morning beside Sasha, who had taken an immediate and undemonstrative liking to her in the way competent women sometimes do with girls who are clearly going to become competent women, and she looked at the space with a quiet and serious attention that Nathan noticed from across the room. The lateral simulation system filled the back third of the floor. The dynamic wall panels on their weighted rail system, the confined passage network, the environmental controls that could push temperature, humidity, and noise levels to approximate real field conditions. Above it, through the 22-foot ceiling that had cost an extra $43,000 in lease modifications and had been worth every cent, the ventilation system moved air with a low, steady hum. The space was functional. It was purposefully not beautiful. Dion had built the curriculum in layers that Nathan was privately proud of without having said so to Dion directly, which Dion probably knew because Dion paid attention to things. The first layer was cognitive, how the human brain processes information under acute stress, what it does correctly and what it reliably fails to do, and why the gap between those two things is the most dangerous terrain in any emergency. The second layer was physical, the body under conditions, the specific degradation of fine motor control and decision-making speed when adrenaline is running, and how you train against that degradation through repetition rather than around it through avoidance. The third layer was what Nathan called the communication layer, which Sasha had renamed the human layer in the curriculum document, and which he'd let stand because she was right. It was the part about what happens between people under pressure, how information moves, how panic spreads and how calm spreads and why both are contagious and which one you choose to be the source of. Hal ran the morning session. Nathan had asked him to, specifically, because Hal had the quality he wanted the trainees to see first. The quality of someone who had been the calmest person in rooms that needed someone calm for long enough that it had become simply who he was. Not performed calm, not managed calm, just the actual thing. Nathan stood at the back of the room and watched the orientation and did not speak, which Claire, standing beside him with a coffee she'd brought from the office 2 blocks away, observed without commenting on for several minutes before she said quietly, "You're not going to take any credit for this. Hal's running it. Hal didn't build it. Hal, Sasha, and Dion built it. I made suggestions." She looked at him sideways. "You really believe that?" "I really believe that. That's either humility or a very specific kind of stubbornness, and I haven't fully decided which. Could be both." She looked back at the floor. Hal was walking the trainees through the facility layout, his voice measured and clear, the voice of a man who had learned to speak in burning buildings. "The name went through the board last week," she said. "Officially, the Answer Initiative, registered subsidiary, dedicated program budget. It took 4 meetings and a 40-page impact projection that Dion put together, but it's done." "I know. Gerald sent me the paperwork. I wanted to tell you myself, she paused, because of what it's named for. He was quiet for a moment. On the training floor, Hal was demonstrating the entry procedure for the lateral simulation. The specific way you move through a space that is actively reconfiguring the hand position, the weight distribution, the breathing pattern that keeps the mind from deciding the situation is worse than it is. 42 first responders watching with the focused attention of people who understood that they were being shown something real. He would have hated this much attention, Nathan said. Marcus. Yeah, he would have shown up, done the work, and gone home, and then complained that the coffee was bad. Claire almost smiled. Was it? The coffee in... She stopped herself. She never pushed into the geography of where. He'd told her about Marcus in pieces over 11 months, across a dozen different conversations, and she had taken each piece and placed it carefully and never tried to arrange them into a shape she preferred. Always bad, he said. In every location, in every context, the coffee was always astonishing in how bad it was. We have good coffee in this building. You do. That's something. She looked at the room. He looked at the room. Lily, across the floor, was asking Sasha something. He could see the question in how she was standing, the attentive tilt of her head. And Sasha was answering with the complete seriousness she brought to everything, which was also, he'd learned, her particular form of respect. She only answered seriously the questions she thought were worth answering. Claire, he said. Yeah. Thank you for this. She looked at him. The look was direct and unornamented. The look she had when she decided a thing was being said plainly and deserved a plain response. You answered the phone, she said. Everything else is just what happened after that. The first cohort ran for 6 weeks. By the 3rd week, Nathan was in the room for every session. Not leading, not yet, but present in the specific way that means you're available rather than observing. The trainees felt the difference. He'd seen enough leaders who confuse surveillance with support to understand that the quality of attention you bring to a space changes the space. And he brought a specific kind of attention, the kind that notices without judgment, that registers failure as data rather than verdict. There was a firefighter named Torres in the second group, a 12-year veteran who'd come in with the specific resistance of someone who'd been doing the job a long time and had decided that anything that looked like classroom training was an insult to experience. Nathan had seen this before. He did not take it personally, and he did not push against it directly. He let Torres work through the first 2 weeks at the edge of engagement, present but not committed, doing the minimum that participation required. In the 3rd week, during a lateral simulation run, Torres got stuck. Not physically. He was strong and quick and moved well. He got stuck in the decision point at the center of the structure where the walls were closing from 2 directions simultaneously, and the correct exit path required ignoring the instinct that said, go left, and trusting the counterintuitive indicator that said, go right. Torres went left. Torres got caught. The simulation stopped. Everyone reset. Nathan walked into the structure. You felt the airflow, Nathan said. From the right. You felt it, and you went left anyway. Torres looked at him. Defensive, not quite hostile. Left was wider. Left was wider for 3 seconds. Then the panel came in from the back, and you were in a corner. Nathan was not accusing. He was just stating what had happened, in the flat and factual tone that removed judgment from it. Your instinct told you wider is safer. That's not wrong as a general principle. It's wrong in a dynamic space. So the training is telling me to override my instincts. The training is telling you to know which instincts to trust and when. Airflow means exit path. Your brain knew it. Your body overruled it because wider looked more like a solution. Nathan paused. That lag between what you know and what you do. That's what we're here to close. Torres looked at the structure, at the panel that had caught him. He wasn't going to say Nathan was right. That wasn't who Torres was, and Nathan wasn't expecting it. But something in his posture had shifted, the barely perceptible shift of someone who has let a piece of information actually land. He ran it again. He went right. He got through in 40 seconds, which was 8 seconds off the target but reachable. By week 5, Torres was the fastest in the cohort. He didn't say anything to Nathan directly about it. On the last day of this program, He shook Nathan's hand with the firm, wordless grip of one specific kind of man, acknowledging another specific kind of man, and Nathan received it the same way it was offered, and that was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough. Nathan had learned this slowly and is still learning it, that enough is its own category, distinct from more and from less, and it has a quality that the other categories don't. It fits the space it's in. It doesn't strain against its edges. November came. The second cohort started. A mix of municipal emergency managers and hospital disaster coordinators, a different professional culture than the first responders, more comfortable in conference rooms, less comfortable in their bodies under pressure, which created its own curriculum adjustments that Dion handled with the methodical creativity that was becoming his signature. The lateral simulation had been modified twice already based on first cohort feedback, which Nathan considered a good sign. A thing that stops being modified has stopped being honest. He was in his office on a Tuesday evening in mid-November, later than he usually stayed. Lily was at a friend's house, first overnight of the school year, an event she had treated as casual and which he had treated as requiring approximately 4 separate confirmations that the friend's parents were reliable people. He was working through an after-action review from that day's session when his phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. Area code he didn't recognize. He looked at it. The specific quality of the moment was not lost on him. The desk lamp, the late hour, the after-action paperwork, the unknown number on a screen in a quiet office. His life had a sense of humor about certain things. He picked up. "This is Nathan. I'm sorry, I think I dialed the wrong number." A man's voice, younger than Nathan, unsteady. "I'm trying to reach emergency services. My father collapsed. We're in the mountains. The 911 call won't go through. I've been trying for 20 minutes. Nathan was already standing. "What's your location? As specific as you can give me." We're on the hiking trail off Wolverton Road in Sequoia. He was hiking ahead of me, and I found him on the ground. He's breathing, but his pulse is..." The voice broke slightly, caught itself. "I don't know what to do." "You're doing it." This time, Nathan had his other phone, the work one, out and was dialing the Tulare County Sheriff's dispatch, which he knew because the program had spent 3 days in October building out county-by-county emergency contact protocols for exactly these coverage gap situations. "Keep talking to me. Is he on his back or on his side?" "His side. He fell on his side." "Good. Don't move him. Is he conscious?" "No, he's not responding. His breathing is..." A pause. "It's weird. It's not regular." "I hear you. I'm getting rescue services on the line right now. I need you to stay on this call." He had the dispatch line ringing on the work phone. It picked up in 2 rings. He gave the location, the description, the situation, requested search and rescue with medical, gave the caller's number as secondary contact. The dispatcher had the specific competence of someone who'd been doing the job long enough for it to be reflex. 30 minutes, they said, for the rescue team. He went back to the first phone. "Still with me?" "Still here." The voice was slightly more controlled. Having something to hold on to, Nathan had found, was the single most important variable. Not information, not instructions, not reassurance. Just someone to hold on to. "Help is coming. 30 minutes. Your job between now and then is to monitor his breathing and stay close enough to guide them to you when they arrive. Do you have a light, a flashlight, your phone light?" "My phone light." "Yes." "Keep it on. When you hear them, voices, movement, turn it on at full and hold it up. Not toward the trail, straight up. They'll spot it in the trees." He paused. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "Daniel, is this your dad?" A short, compressed sound. "Yeah." "How old is he?" 64. "Okay, 64 is not old, and he's breathing, which is the thing that matters most right now. Not reassurance as comfort, reassurance as fact. There's a difference, and people in crisis can feel the difference." "Talk to me. Tell me about him." "What?" "Your dad. Tell me something about him. It helps you stay present, and it helps you not watch the clock." A pause. He could hear the mountain around the young man, the specific outdoor silence, the wind through the trees. He loves hiking. He's been doing this trail for 20 years. He dragged me up it every summer when I was a kid." A pause. I complained every time. Did you ever tell him you liked it? No. 30 minutes, Daniel. You've got time. He stayed on the line for 27 minutes. He did not think about the paperwork on his desk. He did not think about the drive home or the empty house or the particular quality of a night when Lily was somewhere else. He thought about Daniel in the dark on a mountain trail, and about Daniel's father breathing irregularly on the ground, and about the specific gap between 30 minutes of waiting and the moment when the waiting ends. The rescue team came through at 24 minutes, which was faster than promised, and which Nathan noted as something worth documenting for the interagency coordination data. He heard them on the call, heard Daniel say here, over here, and the shift in the ambient sound that meant people had arrived. The dispatcher's voice came briefly back through the work phone to confirm on-scene contact. Daniel came back on the first phone. They're here. His voice was unsteady with relief, the specific unsteadiness that comes when you've been holding something together, and the thing is now being held by someone else. They're with him. Good. Let them work. Stay out of the way unless they ask you something. Okay? A pause. I have to go. They're asking me questions. Go. That's exactly right. Go. Thank you. The words sounded insufficient, and Daniel clearly knew it. There was something in the pause after it, the pause of someone who knows that what happened in the last 27 minutes is larger than thank you and has no other word available. I don't even know how I got this number. Doesn't matter, Nathan said. Go be with your dad. He sat in his office for a moment after the call ended. The desk lamp, the after-action paperwork, the ordinary furniture of a life that had quietly become something different than what it had been a year ago, not in a single dramatic rearrangement, but in the small daily increments of showing up for the thing in front of you. He picked up his phone and called Claire. She answered on the third ring, which meant she'd been doing something else, which was characteristic. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just got a call. A pause. He could hear her recalibrating from emergency mode to regular mode. The brief delay of it. Wrong number? Wrong number. She was quiet for a moment, then, is the person okay? Rescue team reached them. I'll follow up tomorrow. He paused. I wanted to tell you. I know, she said. And she did know. She knew what it meant, this particular call on this particular night, the specific resonance of it. She'd heard enough about the first call, about what the phone ringing at 11:47 had set in motion, to understand that this call was its own kind of answer, a full circle, or more accurately, a continuing line. Because life doesn't close circles the way stories say it does. It just keeps going in the direction you've pointed it. Go home, she said. It's late. I'm going. Nathan. Yeah. Another pause, the brief kind she had when she was deciding to say something she'd already decided to say. You did good tonight. Rescue team did good. You kept them together for 27 minutes in the dark on a mountain. Don't do the thing where you give it away. He thought about that, about the specific habit of distributing credit until there was none of it pointing back at yourself and what that habit was in service of, and whether it was honesty or its own kind of evasion. Okay, he said. We did good. Better, she said. And he could hear the small warmth in it, the thing that had been building in the spaces between their conversations for 11 months, quietly and without announcement, the way most real things build. He drove home through the Tuesday night valley. The streets were wet from an earlier rain. Nothing dramatic, just November doing what November does in California, asserting itself gently. He drove through it with his hands easy on the wheel and the radio off and the specific comfortable silence of a man who has stopped needing noise to fill the quiet. The house was dark when he pulled in. He unlocked the door and stood for a moment in the entryway. Lily's backpack was not by the door. Her shoes were not on the mat. The lamp in the kitchen was not humming because she wasn't there to have left it on, which made the house quieter than usual. And in that quietness, there was something he'd learned to hold without flinching. That the people you love have their own lives and their own nights and their own mountains to navigate. And the best version of being their father or their partner or their teammate is not to fill every space they're in, but to be present in the spaces where your presence is actually needed. He texted Lily, "How is it?" Her reply came back in under a minute, which meant she was awake, which meant the sleepover was going the way sleepovers go. Good. Maya's dog keeps sitting on me. It's fine. How are you? He looked at the question. She asked it the way she asked most things, directly, without preamble, with the specific curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know the answer rather than asking as a formality. Good, he wrote back. Really good. Sleep if you can. Dog or no dog. The dog weighs like 90 pounds, Dad. 90 pounds of warmth. Appreciate it. A pause. Then a single emoji. The face with a half smile. The one she used when she thought he'd said something that was more right than he knew. He put the phone in his pocket and went to the kitchen and made tea, which he'd started doing sometime in the last few months as a late-night alternative to the bourbon and found he actually liked. He stood at the counter while it steeped and looked at the kitchen. The circuit diagram was gone from the table. Had been gone for months. In its place, at the moment, was Lily's copy of a book she was reading for school, and a permission slip for a field trip that needed his signature tomorrow, and a coffee mug she'd painted at one of those ceramic studio places last year. A gift, with his name on it in slightly uneven letters that were imperfect in a way he would not have traded for anything. He thought about Marcus Webb, not with the grinding weight of it, not with the 11 seconds. Just thinking about him, the way he hoped Marcus would be thought about eventually by the people who'd known him. Not as a story about what happened, but as a person who existed and mattered and was gone, and had left things behind in the people who'd known him. Things like the specific knowledge of what it sounds like when someone goes toward the thing that needs going toward without stopping to decide whether they're the right person for it. Nathan Cross was not Marcus Webb. He had never been Marcus and did not need to be. What Marcus had given him, not through intention, not through sacrifice, but simply through the example of how he'd moved through the world, was a direction. Not an answer, just a direction, which was, in the end, all you need. The walking, you do yourself. He thought about Daniel on the mountain trail, holding his phone in the dark, talking about summers he'd complained about. He thought about Torres going right when every instinct said left. He thought about Lily's lamp humming on the table between them on a Thursday in March, while something shifted and settled and became what it was going to be. He thought about a phone ringing at 11:47 on a stormy night, about a wrong number, about the thumbnail of hesitation before he'd answered, and then the answering. That moment still surprised him, if he was honest. Not that he'd gone. He'd made peace with the going. What surprised him was the absence of the calculation. The silence of the part of him that for years had stood in the doorway of every significant thing and asked, "Are you sure? Are you the right person? Last time you were sure, and last time..." All of it had simply gone quiet when he needed it to, and he had moved into the space it left behind, and things had happened in that space that would not have happened if the calculation had won. He was still learning what to do with that. Still working out the relationship between who he'd been and what he'd spent 8 years believing about himself, and what the last 11 months had shown him was also true. People contain more than one true thing at once. That is not a contradiction. That is just being a person. The tea was ready. He sat down at the kitchen table with it and didn't reach for his phone and didn't turn on the television and didn't fill the room with anything but the steam rising from the mug and the ordinary quiet of a house at night where someone lives who is, by most honest measures, okay. Not fixed, not healed in the clean sense of the word, the sense that implies a return to some previous undamaged state. There is no return. There is only forward, and forward doesn't care how ready you are. But moving, pointed in a direction, answering when called, that was enough. That was, as Nathan Cross had been slowly learning for the last year of his life, exactly what enough looks like when you're standing inside it. Not dramatic, not complete, just real. Just the mug and the quiet, and the permission slip that needed signing, and the field that needed tending, and the phone in his pocket that might ring again any night, with a voice that needed someone to stay on the line. He would stay on the line. He knew that now without calculating it. He would pick up, and he would stay. And he would do the thing that was in front of him for as long as it needed doing. That is the whole of it. That is all there is, and it is not a small thing.